At the most critical juncture of the summer offensive, a level of activity is unfolding on the Ukrainian front lines that is completely upending the balance of power. The Russian army has not given up on testing its plans on the ground, which aim to occupy the Donbass, including the fortress belt and the southern axis. From mid-March to this very day, the Kremlin remains fixated on these objectives, maintaining a massive force, ranging between 500,000 and 700,000 troops on Ukrainian soil. According to Belarusian opposition media, the Ukrainian military force, which currently consists of an alleged 110 brigades, stands firmly against this occupation plan. During the critical period, from March to these early days of June, the Moscow regime underestimated the Ukrainian armed forces. They relied entirely too much on their reserves of active personnel, a mistake that may cost them everything. The claims of "we will capture Kyiv in 3 days," touted during the initial days of the conflict, were a direct reflection of this exact strategic arrogance. However, the Kremlin's operational plans on paper are now colliding with the harsh reality of the front lines. The initiative on the battlefield is beginning to shift in a highly unexpected direction. Through its multi-layered defensive lines and tactical flexibility, the Ukrainian army is teaching the Russian military a historic lesson across the entire front. Despite months of grueling efforts to advance, Russian forces have completely lost their momentum. For the first time since the beginning of the campaign, they have been forced to face a brutal reality, a net negative territorial gain. In recent days, the ISW and major media outlets have begun painting a scenario of total operational collapse for the Kremlin's military decision-makers. According to United 24, the Russian army ramped up its offensive tempo across Ukraine, executing exactly 7,000 separate assault attempts. However, in return for this unprecedented expenditure of effort, the territory they managed to hold was limited to a mere 14 square kilometers. The fact that this extraordinary 37.5% increase in Russian assaults yielded such a minimal return on the ground is proof of how weak the army has become at the tactical level. What is even more striking is that this 14-kilometer advance actually represents a net negative balance. This is because, during that exact same time frame, the Ukrainian army successfully executed countermaneuvers in different regions, liberating significantly larger swaths of territory from occupation. Analysts examining in-depth mapping data agree that this decline represents one of the sharpest losses of momentum observed to date. Another noteworthy detail here is that one of the regions where the Russian military experienced a severe decline is the Donbass. We are talking about an area that includes 2 of the 4 specific regions Putin has demanded since the war began, namely the borders of Luhansk and Donetsk. However, in light of the data emerging in recent days, we can see that the Kremlin's war plans are failing in the Donbass as well. Back in 2022, Russia held nearly 77% of the entire Donbas region under its control. As we enter this critical juncture in June, the strategic balance has surprisingly shifted in favor of the Kyiv administration. The Kramatorsk, Sloviansk, Druzhkivka, and Kostiantynivka line, dubbed the Fortress Belt by Ukraine, has erected itself as a formidable barrier against the Russian military. Although Putin's troops mobilized every available resource to breach this area, they were forced to a halt across a significant portion of the contested Kramatorsk-Sloviansk line. The severity of the situation has even been reflected in the statements of separatist leader Pavel Gubarev, one of the earliest and most ardent supporters of the war. In an assessment made around May 2026, Gubarev explicitly voiced the colossal cost of any potential offensive directed at the Kramatorsk-Sloviansk axis.
В сути, там 10 Авдеевок, там можно и миллион людей получить.
These confessional remarks by Gubarev, advocating for the freezing of the front lines, lay bare the deep exhaustion permeating Russian nationalist circles. To resolve this strategic deadlock in the Donbass, the Kremlin is resorting to unbelievable methods. Moscow's drive to reintroduce obsolete Soviet hardware back into its active inventory is a stark example. This move proves just how vital antiquated systems like the T-55 and T-62 tanks have become for Russia, often disguised under the guise of military technical partnerships. The fact that a power claiming to be the world's second-largest army now relies on old Soviet scrap metal for military hardware perfectly encapsulates the sheer scale of their logistical collapse. On the other hand, moving slightly further south from the northern and central sectors of the Donbass, the Kremlin's bleak trajectory of regression continues in the Donetsk direction. The rapid degradation of the 51st Guards Combined Arms Army, once hailed as the unshakable symbol of Russian military prestige around Pokrovsk, provides the clearest snapshot of this exhaustion. The loss of a staggering 1,642 pieces of heavy equipment within a 10-month operational window represents a disaster rarely paralleled in modern military history. When analyzing this massive attrition rate, international military analysts point to a mathematical combat model known as Lanchester's square law. According to this law, a side that falls behind in quality and tactical superiority must increase its personnel and equipment on the battlefield, not linearly, but exponentially, just to close the gap. Essentially, against Ukraine's highly precise artillery and drone fire, Russia has found itself at a severe disadvantage. Under the Lanchester model, the incredibly low survival rates of penal units like Storm Z and Storm V deployed into open terrain by the Russian High Command is a direct consequence of this doctrinal bottleneck. The greatest institutional flaw underlying this grim picture is the Russian General Staff's incredible resistance to accepting the harsh realities on the ground. As a lingering relic of traditional Soviet military doctrine, the compulsion to constantly feed success reports up the chain of command has blinded Moscow. It prevents them from accurately calculating the true devastating battlefield casualty rates. Because replacing these losses is so difficult, senior Russian military figures are struggling to conceal the inherent illogic of this war from Putin. For instance, manufacturing and deploying a replacement for a single T-90M main battle tank creates an industrial bottleneck that takes months to resolve. In stark contrast, Ukrainian forces can neutralize these massive multi-million-dollar systems within minutes using FPV drones that cost only a few thousand. It has been conclusively proven through forensic satellite imagery that a significant portion of Russia's strategic reserves has been entirely depleted since the beginning of the war. In light of all these developments, the central question we must focus on is how Ukraine has managed this incredible strategic comeback despite the adverse conditions on the ground. A highly professional level of tactical flexibility is unfolding not only in the Donbas region but also along the front lines of southern Ukraine. The liberation of 590 kilometers, a strategically vital territory on the southern front, serves as the clearest proof that Ukraine is systematically seizing the initiative. Not stopping there, Ukrainian forces have secured an additional 46 square kilometers around vital crossroads connecting the south to Donetsk, particularly in the direction of the Dnipro. The reclamation of such a vast amount of territory ultimately confirms that the Russian army is being forced into a slow, day-by-day retreat. Quick side note, you're watching the Military Report, and if you haven't subscribed yet, now's the time. So, how exactly did the Ukrainian military manage to upend this combat balance across nearly all front lines? Against a numerically far superior force, the answer to this question lies in the logistics lockdown operation, a flawlessly executed strategy meticulously woven deep behind enemy lines. Ukraine shifted the epicenter of the war beyond mere trenches, moving it directly to the supply arteries that serve as the windpipe of the Russian army. Medium-range attack drones, capable of striking 200 to 300 kilometers deep behind the front lines, form the very backbone of this innovative strategy. The vital land corridors stretching to Luhansk, Donetsk, Mariupol, and even Crimea are now under the absolute dominance of Ukrainian unmanned aerial vehicles. Driving this deep strike strategy is a specially allocated budget of $113 million by the Ukrainian Ministry of Defense. But the money is only part of the story. It is coupled with an entirely new incentive system through this competitive program, dubbed Air Points. Military units that execute the most effective logistical sabotage deep behind enemy lines are swiftly and directly rewarded. The successful strike on the Izvorian border crossing in the easternmost part of the Luhansk region, a target 205 kilometers deep, serves as one of the most stunning proofs of this program's lethal effectiveness on the ground. This unprecedented strike demonstrates that Ukraine has engulfed not only the active combat zones, but the entire occupied rear logistics network in a ring of fire. Bereft of fuel, ammunition, and basic supplies, Russia's massive army is rapidly and visibly losing its operational combat capabilities. Heavy tonnage logistics trucks, critical ammunition depots, and top-tier command centers have now become wide-open targets for these unmanned systems, as supply lines are forced to stretch and depots are relocated further away from the front. Russia's capacity to mount large-scale offensives continues to erode. The sight of burning Russian cargo trucks on the continuously surveilled roads of southern Ukraine stands as a testament to just how flawlessly this strategy is working. An army with paralyzed logistical networks is forced to abandon organized offensives and focus entirely on basic survival reflexes. Furthermore, these strikes are forcing the Russian military to pull its highly valuable ballistic missile launchers and air defense systems much further back from Ukrainian cities. FPV drones tethered with fiber optic cables are neutralizing Russian electronic warfare systems, successfully halting armored convoys from kilometers away. This technological and tactical asymmetry renders Russia's on-paper numerical superiority entirely meaningless on the actual battlefield. Ukraine's operational depth strategy doesn't just target equipment, it fundamentally shatters the psychological resilience of the Russian troops. Fresh conscripts sent to the front lines are experiencing severe trauma, fearing they will be attacked miles behind the lines before they even reach the trenches. The fact that the railway lines at the very heart of the Russian logistics network are now within range of Ukrainian artillery and drones is catastrophically prolonging shipment times. Throughout the history of military science, logistics has been defined as the invisible spine of warfare. By snapping this spine through hyper-precise surgical strikes, Ukraine is effectively paralyzing the Russian military. This reality forces frontline Russian commanders into severe ammunition conservation, dropping their artillery fire rates well below the volume seen at the very start of the war. At this juncture, how the coming weeks and the approaching summer months will unfold has become the primary focus of military analysts. An incredibly complex, grim, and dead-end scenario awaits the Russian military on the Ukrainian front lines. Fueled by the heat of the summer months, the operational groundwork required for new Ukrainian offensive initiatives is rapidly maturing. The assessments of Rob Lee, a world-renowned open-source intelligence expert and highly respected military analyst, provide incredibly clear signals regarding the trajectory of the war at this stage. Mr. Lee emphasizes that while the current situation mirrors the grueling static trench warfare of the final stages of World War I, this deadlock can be shattered. The pockets of local superiority that the Ukrainian military can create through electronic warfare and precision drone strikes are the ultimate key to determining the fate of the front. If these strategic pockets are pierced at the exact right points along already logistically crippled Russian lines, Ukraine's modernized armored units could rapidly push 5 to 10 kilometers deep into enemy defensive structures. In such a dynamic breakthrough scenario, military experts consider it highly probable that Russian lines, already suffering from a severely degraded chain of command, would collapse in a cascading domino effect. The infiltration tactics outlined in Rob Lee's deep analysis represent flawless maneuver warfare, meticulously readapted for the requirements of modern combat. The ability of Ukrainian armored units to immediately exploit enemy vulnerabilities by maintaining real-time encrypted communication with drone operators is now being taught as a new standard in Western militaries. Executing this type of armored thrust, particularly on the eastern bank of the Dnipro River and across the flat plains of the south, carries the potential to completely sever Russia's land bridge to Crimea. Should this critical artery be severed, tens of thousands of Russian troops and massive stockpiles of equipment on the peninsula will be trapped in an irreversible logistical siege. Furthermore, Russia's industrial elasticity and manufacturing capacity to counter such a potential armored breakthrough have already been pushed to their absolute limits. According to reports from open-source intelligence organizations, while Russia's annual production of new T-90M tanks hovered around a mere 240 units, their monthly frontline losses far exceed this number. Every irreplaceable modern armored vehicle forces Russia to deploy older, more poorly armored platforms to the front, posing a vastly greater risk to its personnel. In particular, a heavy reliance on Western-made components for tank optics and advanced thermal sensors has effectively gridlocked the Russian defense industry due to stringent embargoes. The fact that the backlog of damaged vehicles waiting for repairs in factories has long surpassed the volume of new production is the clearest evidence that the Kremlin simply cannot sustain a long-term war of attrition on an industrial scale. Over time, this industrial inadequacy may very well force the Russian military to retreat from other territories it currently occupies. On the other side of the equation, a much more optimistic and hopeful picture emerges regarding future scenarios. The massive innovation ecosystem and rapid manufacturing capabilities that Ukraine has built during the war have elevated it from a nation merely defending its own soil to the role of Europe's ultimate military shield. By completely slashing bureaucratic red tape within the defense sector, the Kyiv administration has granted local manufacturers and civilian engineers an incredible degree of freedom. Thanks to this free market and competitive technological surge, hundreds of different startups across Ukraine, working around the clock to produce the unmanned systems the military requires, it is structurally impossible For a cumbersome top-down Russian military apparatus to keep pace with such a highly dynamic and innovative defense ecosystem, Ukraine's summer strategy will likely expand to target not just specific geographical areas, but the entire command and control apparatus across all occupied territories. Conversely, Russia faces extremely limited and highly risky military options that will come with a massive political price tag. The collapse of its industrial capacity and the severing of its logistical arteries will force Russia either to retreat entirely into a defensive posture or to systematically relinquish the front lines. In short, the overarching picture is quite clear. The broader character of this war has moved far beyond merely tallying gained or lost square kilometers. It has transitioned into a phase focused squarely on breaking the enemy's will to fight and shattering their logistical spine. Ukraine's innovative military ingenuity and technological adaptability have begun to slowly crush a massive force, one entirely bogged down by traditional doctrines under its own sheer weight. Looking through the lens of military history, the fate of massive armies has always been dictated by the security of their logistical arteries and the seamless flow of rearguard supplies. Today, every medium-range drone gliding toward its target in the Ukrainian skies represents a highly precise strategic padlock, clamping down on Russia's occupation plans. From the fortified high ground of the Donbass to the southern plains stretching down to the Black Sea, the strategic initiative has irreversibly changed hands. It appears the Kremlin will soon be forced to accept that the glorious military parade it envisioned years ago has crashed into the unyielding wall of battlefield reality, transforming into a desperate, relentless struggle for survival. As these developments prove, the correct application of technology and intelligence on the battlefield can yield results far beyond mere military statistics or sheer numerical manpower. Following all these in-depth military analyses, two critical questions regarding the course of the war inevitably come to mind. How much longer can the Russian military sustain its frontline presence amidst utterly paralyzed logistical lines and catastrophic casualties that vastly outpace its industrial production? And, as Rob Lee emphasized, could a potential Ukrainian armored breakthrough, spearheaded by electronic warfare and drone support, serve as the historical breaking point that transforms this war of attrition into a decisive victory? We look forward to reading your comments. Make sure to subscribe to the Military Report for more breaking Russia-Ukraine war news, insights, and analysis. Thank you for watching.